And hello, everybody, and welcome back. It is exciting to be with you in this project management for supervisors course. What are the keywords? What are the phrases? What are the concepts that you need to know to be successful? Do you have to have a degree in project management? No. Do you have to have certification? No. It's helpful, right? It helps make you an expert and to manage issues as they come up and do problem solve quickly. But is it required? No. We have a lifetime of these skills. We just need to fine tune them and to know what key tools we can turn to. This is another example of that this week: change management and change control. There are really two concepts to consider. Well, maybe three. There are a lot of concepts to consider. Let's just get started on a few. One is that the definition of a project is by nature that it is temporary. It'll have a beginning and an end date for sure. We may not know what it is, but it will end. And that it's unique. Our deliverable every time is unique. Even if I climb towers to install a satellite, the weather is different, which includes the winds, the heat, the cold, which changes the some of the equipment I'm using, right? The equipment, is it aging? Is this a new satellite? Am I having to download, right? What are my supervisor's expectations? These things are always evolving and changing. And so every project is unique. That's what makes it challenging. So we build our projects so we don't have changes, but frankly, as project managers, we expect changes. So you build a plan so you won't have changes. We build it in that kind of detail, but yet we expect changes. That's the world we live in. That's what I meant when I said before that project managers take chaos and turn it into order. Okay, detailed planning. We don't want changes, but yet because every project is unique, we expect changes. So some concepts to be aware of. Why change management, right? Well, what I really want you to do is focus on these three terms in the center of the screen. We have change management because as we're creating our deliverable, whether it's installing a cell phone tower, changing a car transmission, whatever we're doing for a living, right? We want to think of, are there things that need to be corrective? That would require then a corrective action. What we're trying to do is realign performance because we've seen actual deviations, right? And so corrective action is going to bring this expected future performance back in line with what were the anticipated project deliverables. Another reason we could do change control is as preventive action. Preventive action is going to ensure future performance based on what could be anticipated deviations. Maybe it's an extra bolt in the tower that secures the platform. Okay, and of course, then there's defect repair. Right, whenever we're doing a job, there's scrap, or sometimes we have to do the work again, rework. Right, and just to get the deliverable right to where it's expected to be, right? Maybe it's not conforming at the moment for some reason. And we go through a bunch of sheet metal or a bunch of screws, etc. This also would drive change control because as a project manager, we are trying to reduce the resources used and to accelerate the time that a project is done successfully. Okay, so we do corrective actions and preventive actions and defect repair. In order to make that happen, I always recommend some sort of integrated change control process. Now, this is very detailed. You don't have to go to this level of detail in every job, but these are things to consider. So what we call integrated change control, that's a term borrowed from previous PMBOK guide versions, integrated change control. So I just stay with it. It's a great term because we're integrating the change because it will impact our scope and it will impact our scheduled deliverables. It will impact our budget, perhaps, okay? Risks, communications, maybe contracting or procurement, right? There's just so many things that can be impacted. So I like the term integrated change control. So this is whatever process you have for reviewing, approving, and managing and communicating changes, right? You want to consider configuration management, right? If your cell tower is to be configured in such a way, that has to be worked into and described as part of the change to make sure you're adhering to whatever is the standard. When I was in the military, we would call it the technical orders. What technical publications, right? That should help drive configuration management. You want to make sure your change complies with that. The great thing about having a process is you're actually, as a project manager, reducing risk of failure by having a set process in place, a formal process. And so, and the bottom line rule to any changes, don't just consider that change by itself, but consider that change in light of all the other areas that you are managing. So if the change is about scope, right? You have new requirements to secure this satellite dish on a cell phone tower. Yes, the requirements are the number one reason for the change, and that's the first thing to consider. But you also want to consider the other aspects: risk, quality, communications, the stakeholders that are involved, both on your team and maybe back at the office, right? Schedule, budget, the list goes on and on. You want to integrate, yes, we're focused on the requirement, but how does it also impact these other things? Okay, who's responsible for changes in a project? The project manager is, right? And who is this a formal or informal process? Generally, I prefer a formal process. That can be just a checklist, right? I'm good with a checklist so that you do the same things every time and make these considerations. In agile project management, because its nickname is change driven, change is just part of it. It's a much more streamlined approach, but I'm talking in a normal day-to-day project. And who can request a change? Anybody can request it. You would have to then consider it. You'll make decisions hopefully based on a board. Now, when I say a board, that sounds very laborious, right? It can be you collect input from your team, you call back to talk to your supervisor. That can be the board. But notice in your tools that we talked about, I think back in week 1 or week 2, but there was a decision log. If your supervisor makes a decision, record it in that decision log, right? Because if something goes wrong, it's not about blame, but you want to be able to make sure there are roles and responsibilities and that the right responsibilities were taken at the right time. Okay. And just because you have a change request doesn't mean you have to approve it. You might defer it. You might reject it. You might reconsider it later if the reason you rejected it changes. Okay. Now, this is, when we consider, there are really 3 things. If you're building your own change control plan, you want to consider. You want to have a change control system, right? How do changes get up channeled to you? How do we create this open communications? Then you'll want to have a board. Like you said, it doesn't have to be laborious. It could be laborious. It could be a formal time each week, every Tuesday, or it could be, hey, boss, the team brought, Joey or Susie brought this to my attention. We considered it, pros and cons. Here's the impact on cost, schedule, requirements. We really think it's the right thing to do. What do you think? That could be the board. And then, of course, write it down, what you discussed, who decided, and that we call a change control log. So any change control system you develop should have any change control should have a change control system, CSS, which should include a change control board, and of course, write down what was presented and the decision. That's a change control log. Okay. And that pretty much is it. This slide I love, right? It's kind of a, Ron Burgundy from that was a movie about reporters in San Diego, right? I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal, right? So is change control kind of a big deal. Now, if you wanted to plot out a process, it could look like this. I'm not saying you have to, but some people will want to do this. And here is a good starter, right? Always configure your configuration that you have to produce with your deliverable. And then look at your baselines. Does this change fit within the schedule, fit within the requirements, fit within the budget? If so, then make sure you already have a change control system set up, and it should be this integrated process that incorporates schedule, scope, cost, quality, contracting, risk, communications, resource management, etc. That's that integrated approach. And then, of course, have your board and write down what was presented and what was decided and what the final decision was. And then, of course, as a great project manager, communicate that result to others. Communicate it. And then, of course, go implement it exactly as it was noted, and update your configuration management, right? You started with this configuration management. Now you just approved a change. Go ahead and update configuration management again. This is the same process as slide 4, but this is a little more, this is kind of a more streamlined flow. And here's actually a picture of your change log that is in that document that we are using this week. But think of it, the first thing a project manager as a supervisor should do is work to prevent changes, right? So we work to make sure that corrective actions aren't required, right? With detailed planning, or preventive actions aren't required with detailed planning, or we've planned refined processes that avoid defect repair. Okay, so we try and prevent the change always. Then we are looking to identify changes. So we build it so we won't have changes. But as project managers and supervisors, we do expect changes because our deliverable is unique. Okay. Then before we make anything, we analyze. Project managers always analyze first. What's the impact of implementing the change or of not implementing the change? And then we create a change request. So we write some things down. We do that integrated change control process. I mentioned you'll have a change control system, which will include a change control board and a log, right? Look at that everybody understands the problem and the change, and that are there other options we could consider? And of course, communicate that to others and update your status log and other documents and communicate it to your supervisors and other people. In Agile is just change driven, so it should be very smooth and streamlined. Now, I wanted to give you my own quick example of change control. I once had, the Air Force has like a 3-page change control form, and no airman in the world was ever going to fill it out because I didn't understand most of the items to fill out. And you're like, heck with it. But we need to know what their recommendations are, right? The airmen in my Air Force are at the heart of what's going on, and they have the ideas. So I developed with a knowledge management person who is also a SharePoint expert, and we broke the formula up into tiny pieces. And so when the airmen would make the change recommendation, all they saw were around 8 boxes, easy to fill in. And that automatically in a workflow went to the next supervisor who reviewed it, filled in their portion, and they only saw what the airmen had filled out and their portion. And then when that was approved, it went up to the headquarters automatically by workflow, and the headquarters box then appeared, right? We weren't overwhelming people, and it was a way to solicit changes. It was very exciting. Okay, I look forward to your examples in the assignment this week.